My mother told us never to speak ill of the dead, so let Jerry Falwell speak for himself.
I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
That, of course, was Jerry Falwell right after the atrocities of 9/11. Downright gleeful, so it seemed, at the sport God had made of America for tolerating wicked gays, liberals, progressives, feminists, agnostics, and Bill of Rights huggers. Falwell was rightly eulogized and applauded this week for his role in creating a born-again Republican Party. But it wasn't his political connections critics couldn't stomach. It was his theology of fear and loathing. No man I've tracked these past 25 years so demonized people he didn't know or like or understand, or seemed so indifferent to the hurt inflicted by his grotesque caricatures of those multitudes of people who would never be favored in his precinct or pew. It is sometimes a trait of the fundamentalist mind to deny the humanity of others, and the fundamentalist mind is not unique to America. Consider the story of the writer Bruce Bauer. 10 years ago, Bruce Bauer had Christian fundamentalism on his mind. His book, Stealing Jesus, was a wake-up call about how the Falwells and Robertsons and their legions of followers were sowing hatred in the name of God. As a gay man and a Christian himself, Bauer warned that they had hijacked Jesus' message of love and replaced it with a narrow-minded legalism. His book was hailed in the press, named one of the year's best by Publishers Weekly. But then Bauer left America for the more tolerant shores of Europe. What he found there was no refuge at all. In parts of Europe's booming immigrant Muslim population, Bauer witnessed a growing and dangerous radicalism, a strident interpretation of Islam hostile to women and homosexuals, and one that threatened some of the core values of Western society. And so Bruce Bauer has written what he hopes will be another wake-up call, while Europe slept, how radical Islam is destroying the West from within.
Its own democratic values.
We met recently when he was in New York. You write in your book, the very things that I most love about Europe are those things most threatened by the rise of fundamentalist Islam. What are those things that you most love about Europe, or did?
It's the freedom. It was simply the freedom. As a gay person coming from a country where we're still caught up in these arguments with the religious right about whether gay people should have the same rights as anybody else, to go to Europe. The idea that men and women should be treated differently, or gay and straight people should be treated differently, seemed to have been decided and moved past. It just seemed so civilized.
Wasn't the prevailing attitude when you moved to Amsterdam the philosophy that, well, you do your thing, I'll do mine, just leave each other alone?
Yeah, that's really the Dutch formula. And that's worked for them for centuries, and this is why the Netherlands was a center of liberty hundreds of years ago. The problem is that when they extended that philosophy to Muslims, Muslims were able there to really establish a separate society within the society without being touched by the democratic culture of the Netherlands. They have their own schools where the kids are taught the Quran and Quranic values, and fathers, the patriarchs, are able to treat their wives just however they want to. Women have no rights to speak of. The daughters are sold off in marriages. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of religion. This is the mentality that's been imported into Europe.
But there is a paradox, it seems to me. I mean, you were attracted to Europe and the Netherlands in no small part because you could be who you are, and your Dutch neighbor could be who he or she is, and you left each other alone. You didn't try to say, my way of life as a gay man is better than your way of life as a straight man, or vice versa. And yet, here you're saying we can't leave them to follow their own thing?
It's because multiculturalism works if the cultures that you're talking about are all cultures that respect basic human rights, that respect freedom, that respect freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. If you're dealing with a culture that is essentially intolerant of other values, and that is oppressive itself, then multiculturalism causes problems.
So you're saying we can't treat that ideology or that culture as equal to one that espouses democratic values?
Well, we certainly can't allow that culture to thrive in our own backyard, in our own countries, because it's not only unfair to the people living within that subculture who are being oppressed, but it's, in the long run, it poses a danger to all of us because of the demographic situation.
But aren't we talking about only 5% of Europe's population?
We're talking about a population that is growing very quickly. It doesn't take long for 5% to turn to 10 to 15 to 20. If you have a host native population that is decreasing quite rapidly and a immigrant population that is growing quickly, you're going to see great changes very quickly, and that's something people don't sometimes understand so well.
So what is it about Muslims that make them outside the mainstream of assimilation, integration?
There's a problem with them living in enclaves. They've come to Europe and they've settled in their own communities, in very closed communities. They've transferred their own societies, essentially, their own original values and social structures from the places they came from into Europe. It's a patriarchal society that exists within these modern democratic cities in Europe that we think of as the most advanced, progressive places on earth. And the contrast between the ways in which some people in a city like Amsterdam live and others do is mind-boggling.
When I read the book, I was thinking, isn't there at the core of this an ideology as opposed to a theology? Because there are so many Muslims who tell me they don't agree with that ideology.
Now, I think it's fair to say that ideology really is the best word to use here, because I think it does make it very clear what we're dealing with. And one problem with the situation with Islam in Europe is that it is beginning to reawaken a lot of extreme right elements who have responded to the presence of Muslims among them, not by trying to defend freedom and democracy and pluralism and secularism, but by responding with a nativist intolerance toward any outsider, toward the very idea of outsiders, and reclaiming their ethnic identity, which is what got Europe in trouble in the first place. And that's a dangerous move.
Bruce Bauer.
Bauer's book was a finalist for the prestigious National Book Critics Circle Award, and it's been praised by many. But it's also been highly controversial. By throwing a light on the radical practices of some European Muslims, Bauer was accused of xenophobia. The Economist wrote that while he had revealed a real problem, he had cast too wide a net. Bauer says let the reader decide. He welcomes a debate about the conclusion he draws in his book, but says the facts will speak for themselves.
In Britain, a poll by the Daily Telegraph showed that 40% of British Muslims support the idea of having Sharia law,
which means
Quranic law in Britain.
Under Sharia law as you see it, and I know you're not a Muslim, but under Sharia law as you see it, what would happen to you as a gay man?
There are different interpretations. Some of them favor stoning. Some of them favor dropping a wall on you. There are disagreements about exactly which is the best method of execution.
But I can hear many American Muslims saying, no, that's not what we're in America. That's not what we're about. He may be talking about a radical core of Islamic extremists, but we're in America because we don't agree with them.
Yeah, but when you have Sharia law, it's not run by people who are moderate and open-minded. It's run by people who are judging according to what they read in the Quran and in their other holy books. And there are no questions about that as far as they're concerned.
The BBC broadcast a report that Rotterdam almost has a Muslim majority. So is it conceivable that a Muslim majority in a democratic society could vote in Sharia law, and would Europe accept that?
Well, that's a disturbing case, because recently the Minister of Justice of the Netherlands, Piet Hein Donner, he said he actually said this. He said that if a majority of people voted to have Sharia law in the Netherlands, it would be a disgrace to say no.
A disgrace?
Yes.
Because of the democratic principle had prevailed?
Yes, because if that's what the majority wants, that's what we have to have.
And what would that mean in your sense of for the rights of minorities?
That would mean that that would be the last election for a very long time. It would be a terrifying situation.
Bauer says this is indicative of how some European officials are capitulating to a growing conservative Islamic community. For instance, just a few months ago, a judge in Germany denied a Muslim woman's appeal for a speedy divorce from her abusive husband, arguing that the woman's cultural environment allowed a husband to beat his wife. So even though domestic violence is a crime in Germany, the judge cited a passage from the Quran as reason to deny the woman's divorce request. There was a bill in Parliament to protect Muslims and gays from discrimination. And in some backroom haggling, it was changed to exclude gays.
Yes.
Because of fears that Muslims, quote, might feel offended if they were lumped together with homosexuals. What does that say to you?
There's a lot of that going around too. That's very disturbing to me. Ken Livingstone, the mayor of London, used to be a strong advocate for gay rights, and he has changed his tune also for the same kind of reasons. He's defended allowing this Muslim leader al-Qaradawi into England, and he welcomed him with open arms. He held a public forum with him. He stood at his side. This is a man who has called for executing gay people. This is a man who's defended suicide bombers. It's a signal that a lot of leaders are willing to sell out gay people because they think that that will solve a lot of the problems with the Muslim community.
It will appease the Muslims?
Yes, exactly. And they've been allowing leaders of terrorist groups who have been kicked out of Muslim countries for being terrorists. They've allowed them to settle in England and paid them a lot of money in welfare payments.
Why? What's the? I don't understand the reasoning for that kind of policy.
It's this misguided sense of openness and multiculturalism. It's the only way I can explain it. I mean, in Norway we have a man named Mulla Krekar, who is the founder of a terrorist group called Ansar al-Islam, and he came to Norway a couple of decades ago as a so-called refugee, under totally bogus pretenses and premises, and he's been traveling ever since then, back and forth between Norway and Iraq and Iran, involved in all sorts of things. And it has been impossible to get this man sent back to Iraq.
To be deported?
To be deported.
Why?
Because the authorities say that it would put him in danger. He might be tried there and executed, and they can't have that because they don't believe in capital punishment. And so I've seen him walking in the streets myself.
You think Europe is committing cultural suicide?
At the moment, it's hard to deny that it is. Yeah.
By refusing to what?
By refusing to embrace and appreciate and stand up for its own democratic values.
You describe so well the values of democracy, pluralism, tolerance, and sexual equality that took root in modern Europe. I wonder, why aren't they powerful enough to absorb and assimilate and mitigate these tribal customs?
I think that, for one thing, European leaders, in many cases, have lost confidence in the values of their own society. They've placed multiculturalism above democracy and freedom.
What do you mean by multiculturalism?
Well, I mean an attitude, the attitude that all cultures are equal, all value systems are equal, that we should respect other value systems because they are other value